The neoconservatives, who are just a branch office of the British Empire, these crazy people, Victoria Nuland, Robert Kagan, they started the expansion of NATO, which Bush and Baker had promised the Russians would not happen, that NATO would never, Baker promised Gorbachev, NATO would never expand 1 inch east of Germany. And instead, they expanded it right to the borders of Russia. Why? To get a war between the US and Russia. This was what was going on all that time, to get a war between the US and Russia. They expanded NATO. They overthrew governments on Russia's periphery, Ukraine, Georgia, others, all toward war.
Trump is a hero. He is a hero, and he's going to go down in history like another George Washington, I swear.
Yes, he will. You're absolutely right.
But we need to support him, and we did. Look at the example we made here with getting his nominees through. That was because of people calling
Right.
their senators and encourage them to do it. And they knew they were going to get primaried if they didn't vote the right way.
Exactly.
So, and we've got Elon Musk on our side. The primary thing reminded me of him.
Yes, right.
So, and now we need to, Trump's great, and what Trump's getting going is fantastic, but we need to back him.
Hello and welcome to Take Control of Your Liberty with Scott Tregurtha, where we help critical thinkers by giving you the most true and accurate information we can find, which they should be giving you on mainstream media, but are not. So you can decide for yourself and take control of your liberty, your freedom, and your future. And now, here is Scott Tregurtha.
Hello, everybody. My guest today is someone we've had here before, and he's so filled with such knowledge. And since we now have a sentient being in the Oval Office who's majorly motivated to end the never-ending wars, I thought we should have him back again to give us an update on the coming end of the Russian-Ukraine war. Tony Papert is a 40-plus year political activist and economic expert, and is going to share his knowledge-based viewpoint on the progress we are now experiencing in the ending of this Russia-Ukraine war, along with what we need to do to keep the peace, not only in Ukraine and Russia, but also worldwide. Please welcome Tony Papert. Hi, Tony. Welcome back to Take Control of Your Liberty.
Yeah, hi, Scott. Great to see you again.
Same here. So I wanted to, what I want to get done in this interview is quite a kind of a broad problem, I guess. And so that basically, I'm just going to go ahead and state it, and we can go from there. So the basic problem I want to address here is, and we're making a lot of progress on it really quickly, I'd say, but it's what now do we have to do to end this Ukraine war with Russia? And I realize there's a lot of background. You start wherever you want on that.
I mean, I think, there's been, today is a day that is going to live in history forever.
Mm-hmm.
There was a fundamental change in world history today because since the end of the Cold War, or really since the Cold War began to end, even as early as the 70s, even if you say the Cold War finally ended with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 or dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. But as the Cold War was ending, the empire, the globalist empire, which is the British Empire, had decided, and Lyndon LaRouche laid this out in many writings, the globalist empire decided that with the end of the Cold War, they no longer had to put up with the existence of sovereign nation states. First and foremost, the U.S., but sovereign nation states in general was no longer necessary. The British Empire had tolerated the existence of sovereign nations only for the sake of war fighting. They hate, the sovereign nation, sovereignty, scientific creativity, industrial economic progress, all these things they hate, because with sovereignty, with science, with industrial economy, the upstart commoners get to think that they're worth something. They can make decisions. So the British Empire was always against the sovereign nation state. But when they were fighting a war or contemplating fighting a war, they needed just these things: advanced industry, technology, scientific progress, and a citizenry which would have courage and fight. So they put up with the sovereign nation state for the sake of war fighting. And you see that throughout modern history, but as an example that I was just using today is Franklin Roosevelt, the New Deal, the Depression. Now, Franklin Roosevelt came to office with a lot of plans for ending the Depression. And, in the years following his inauguration in 1933, he did make some progress. But by 1937, roughly, he was forced he was forced by the Congress, but behind it was the empire. He was forced to reverse his New Deal measures and basically put the U.S. back into depression. Again, some call it the Second Depression. And what allowed him to ultimately, or under what circumstance did the empire permit him to ultimately defeat the Depression? It was the mobilization for World War II, a situation where the British were anticipating a Nazi invasion of the British Isles, which might have succeeded, and put an end to the British Empire. Under those circumstances, they tolerated and even encouraged the U.S. Massive reindustrialization for rearmament to win the war, scientific progress, radar, all these things. And similarly, during all those years of the Cold War, maybe 40, 45 years, the British, there was a lot of things which were wrong with the U.S. during that Cold War period, but some things which were right with the U.S. was we had industry, we had some degree of scientific progress, we had advanced technology. Why? Because the empire could not allow the United States to deindustrialize and weaken itself and be overrun from the Soviet Union. So they tolerated the nation, the sovereign nation. But with the end of the Cold War, they said, we're not going to put up with it any longer. We're going to get rid of the sovereign nation state. And they introduced all the things which Donald Trump successfully campaigned for president against, like, racial insanity, sex insanity. This is not in an order. It really should be. The deindustrialization of the United States, the takedown of our science, the green pestilence, which takes down our energy production and takes down our industry. The British Empire launched all these things to get rid of the sovereign nation state, as I say, first and foremost the U.S., but also in Europe. And the other thing they did during the same, period, roughly, beginning, in a somewhat later phase, but over the same period, they launched the U.S. into what became war with Russia, the Ukraine war, a proxy war with Russia. The neoconservatives, who are just a branch office of the British Empire, these crazy people, Victoria Nuland, Robert Kagan, they started the expansion of NATO, which Bush and Baker had promised the Russians would not happen, that NATO would never. Baker promised Gorbachev NATO would never expand 1 inch east of Germany. And instead, they expanded it right to the borders of Russia. Why? To get a war between the U.S. and Russia. This was what was going on all that time, to get a war between the U.S. and Russia. They expanded NATO. They overthrew governments on Russia's periphery, Ukraine, Georgia, others, all toward war. I mean, in the particular Ukraine case, I mean, it's unbelievable what was done. Successive revolutions by the USIA, CIA, which Musk is defunding, successive revolutions to overthrow governments which wanted to have peaceful relations with Russia in favor of governments which wanted war with Russia and which wanted U.S. troops in Ukraine, U.S. weapons in Ukraine. Why? To provoke Russia into war with the U.S., to destroy both. That was our younger viewers have lived their whole lives under the rules of this crazy arrangement, which was designed for nothing but destruction of Russia, destruction of the U.S. in mutual war. And Trump campaigned against this. He won. Americans don't want it. And in a masterful move, he just conducted, as you know, a phone conversation with President Putin, followed by rapid dispatch of envoys to Saudi Arabia to meet with the Russians today. And they're going to put an end to this nonsense. That's the intention. And of course, Britain and their sycophants and, their stooges are hysterical about this. One of the headlines in the New York Times just went up there is U.S. and Russia pursue partnership in a head-spinning shift in relations. U.S. and Russia pursue partnership in a head-spinning shift in relations. So, I mean, we're in a new period of history where totally new things are possible. Yeah, you're not interrupting me. I just finished.
Oh, great. Perfect timing. I just wanted to, for the audience's sake, I'm addressing the audience now, for you to, you've got to be in the mindset that what Tony's describing here is he's doing this under the setting that we've got an oligarch running things and they are manipulating things one way or the other. And Tony is very knowledgeable on the fact that the public has, to a large extent today, they have noticed there's an oligarch there. That wasn't the case 10, 20 years ago. It wasn't that common. You hear it on the regular news now. They're talking about the oligarchs. And what Tony's saying is that oligarch happens to be the financial British Empire, the same one we were fighting back in the Revolutionary War. They just never stopped. That's not that hard to believe, is it? But at any rate, and there are previous podcasts I've done, one with Tony, who is our true enemy, that goes into this in more depth, and another one I did earlier with Jim Doree about what's the truth behind the Russo-Ukraine war. But they went into depth on other subjects, and Tony's he's addressing what it's going to take to end this Ukraine war right now. And I just wanted to get clarify some things with people when you're talking about the British and all. That's what you're talking about. So go ahead, Tony.
Well, so I mean, so they, I mean, so though the U.S. and Russian negotiators met for 4.5 hours in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia earlier today,
Right.
and it's incredible what they did. That basically, Rubio, our Secretary of State, and his opposite number, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, both described the talks afterwards, and they both described them in exactly the same way in base, that there was like 3.5 subjects of discussion. First, repair relations, meaning that Obama did this after the election. He did this in the interregnum after the election of Donald Trump. He just about broke relations with Russia because the oligarchy, again, which controlled Obama, was desperate that Trump would follow through on his campaign promises for better relations with Russia. So Obama, during the interim period after the election, before the inauguration, tried the best he could. Well, he started Russiagate. He had meetings with, this is now public, everybody knows it, I guess, but he had meetings with CIA Director Brennan on Russiagate, pinning, blaming the election of Trump on the Russians and all this stuff. So he did that. At the same time he was launching Russiagate, he almost virtually cut relations with Russia. I mean, he withdrew the U.S. ambassador from Russia. He forced the Russians to withdraw their ambassador from here. He closed down consulates. He almost completely cut off dialogue with Russia, which is very striking because all during those 40 years of the Cold War, believe it or not, there was all the time communication between not just the State Department, but all kinds of U.S. agencies like Department of Energy, everything, with their Russian CIA, with their Russian opposite numbers. They were always talking for all the bad things that happened during those 40 years. And Obama cut that off, let's say, maybe 80%, and Biden cut off the other 20%. So there was no discussion between the two, which is extremely dangerous when they're the world's two leading nuclear powers.
Right.
They're not talking at all. That there was also mill. I mean, all the time of the Cold War, our chiefs of staff were in contact with theirs, defense secretary with their defense minister. All this went on for 40 years of Cold War, ended by Obama and Biden totally. So the first agreement at today's meeting in Saudi Arabia was to put that all back together again. They're appointing a group. I don't think they may not have yet appointed a group, but they agreed to appoint people on both sides who would put all those things back together again. Second was Ukraine. They agreed to appoint people on both sides who will get together and sort out the issues. And this addresses Scott's question. I mean, sort out the issues to be agreed on vis-a-vis Ukraine, so that a peace agreement can be reached. Now, I mean, the most important thing is exactly what Trump said, and he said it several times, that the war was caused by Biden's insisting on Ukraine membership in NATO. And Trump said, well, if I were Russia, I would never accept that. Russia will never accept that. He's addressed it many times. He said, before Putin, which is true, nobody would accept it. Now, you take liberal Russians, pro-American, when CIA Director Burns, outgoing CIA Director Burns, was ambassador to Moscow, he wrote a cable to Washington that said that Ukraine membership in NATO is 100% red line tripwire for Russia. No Russian will allow it. You take liberal Russians, conservative, pro-American, nobody will allow it. It's just the same as the Russian nuclear missiles in Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis, with a few minutes flight time to Moscow. They're just not going to permit it. So obviously, that's off the table. I mean, there are other things to be settled, which is the Russians have incorporated 4 provinces of Ukraine into Russia, which are the eastern provinces, where the people are Russian-speaking, feel they're part of Russia, and more to the point, they have been persecuted terribly by the Ukrainian government ever since 2014, where, there's been continual shelling of the principal city, Donetsk, in Donbass, of civilians in Donetsk for all those years.
Hey, Tony,
Yeah.
what was their justification for shelling civilians in those cities?
I never heard any justification. But
They just did it.
Yeah, they just did it, and they kept doing it.
Okay.
It's incredible. It's just persecution. They passed laws that they can't use their language, they can't school their children in their language, and the reality is, about half of the people in Ukraine speak Russian as a first language, whether they consider themselves Russian or not. But they try to outlaw their church, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. It's just incredible persecution of these people. Now, the European leaders met with the Russians and Ukrainians in Minsk and arrived at agreements to try to head off this war. They arrived at agreements for fair treatment of Russians living in Ukraine. And if those agreements had been adhered to, there would have been no war, but they weren't. The Ukrainian government violated them, and afterwards, Angela Merkel, who was the German chancellor who signed the agreements, said, well, we didn't intend that they would be implemented. We just agreed to it to give the Ukrainians more time to arm, i.e. for a war against Russia. So
thank you for the deception.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That's what it amounts to.
Yeah, right. So, so in response to all this persecution, which was agreed to be stopped and never stopped, the Russians just incorporated, they conducted referenda in those 4 provinces, said the people want to join Russia, and incorporated them into Russia. So, this is an issue. In the course of the war, which the Ukrainians have lost the war, they're just going on to sacrifice people at an enormous rate. And the figures you hear for casualties are radically wrong. Right now, Ukrainian to Russian casualties are running 10 Ukrainians to 1 Russian in that neighborhood. It's completely lopsided defeat of Ukraine. They've lost. And what Defense Secretary Hegseth said at a meeting in Europe last week was that territory currently held by Russia, by the Russian army, is unlikely to be returned to Ukraine. So, but the territorial questions have to be. The Russians have not captured the entirety of those 4 provinces, but those kinds of issues have to be settled.
Can you just imagine if the other thing that Hegseth said was said by somebody at the beginning 4 years ago?
Exactly.
Which is, we're not going to have Ukraine join NATO.
Exactly. Realistically, Ukraine is not going to join NATO.
Right. He said that yesterday, right?
Exactly. And
that should have been said 4 years ago, but we didn't have people in there that would ever say such a thing.
Well, they said the opposite.
The opposite. Yeah.
Biden said they're going to join, and he sent his vice president there to say Ukraine is going to join NATO, to repeat it in the face of the Russians immediately before the invasion. Yeah, right. Absolutely. This is, and legally they never could join because NATO has a clause saying no country can join NATO which has a territorial dispute, an ongoing territorial dispute, because NATO would become party to the dispute, by them joining. So legally, Ukraine couldn't join, but these people kept holding out NATO membership, right up to the point when Biden was kicked out of there. Just in order, as a war provocation, because that's what they want. I mean, it's not Biden is behind this, as everybody knows. I mean, probably doesn't know where he is half the time. But
Manipulating Biden.
Yeah, but Biden was saying, we're going to destroy Russia. And, a clown like Lindsey Graham says, this is wonderful. Russia is being destroyed and no Americans are dying. This is insane.
Right. Isn't that wonderful? We can remote kill a whole country from here without getting our hands dirty.
But I was going through, let me just go, can I go back a sec?
Yeah,
no?
Absolutely.
I was going through four things that they agreed in basic principle. So one was restore relations. 2, move to settle the Ukraine war. 3, and this is what the New York Times is so upset about. They said that we want to achieve a new partnership in world politics and economy, which is extremely promising. That's what they said. A new partnership in politics and economics, which is extremely promising. And it is. I mean, there's tremendous things that Russia and the U.S. can do together. I mean, one of the most immediate is step in and help stop the killing in the Middle East.
Right.
Which was mentioned in the Putin-Trump phone call.
And this is the opposite of what the oligarchs want to occur.
Absolutely.
That's why the New York Times is upset, because they are an extension of them. They're controlled by the oligarchs.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I didn't hear that last one, but I can see how they'd get upset over that.
Rubio said we want to pursue the incredible opportunities that exist in partnership with the Russians, both geopolitical and economic. This is just an amazing and encouraging development. I mean, Russia has been, as people probably know, President Trump has mentioned several times, Russia and the United States have never fought a war. Russia and the United States have been allies in the greatest wars. Russia was our ally in the Revolutionary War. I mean, Catherine the Great, the Tsarina of Russia, concluded an agreement of armed neutrality with Prussia and other European countries, that they would resist the British blockade by arms, if necessary, of the colonies. So this was part of our European support, which allowed us to win our Revolutionary War. In the Civil War, when Britain was threatening to recognize the Confederacy, Britain was the power behind the Confederacy throughout. Britain was arming them covertly, but we all know it. Britain was arming them. Britain was funding them covertly. The Confederacy was basically an outpost of Britain, because what the Confederacy was the slave cotton farming, which sent all the cotton to England, for their monopoly. So it was just the Confederacy was a puppet or a cat's paw of the British Empire. But when Britain, during the Civil War, made moves toward recognizing, or threatened, which they never did, but threatened to recognize the Confederacy, Tsar Alexander II sent the Russian fleet to New York and to San Francisco as a signal to the British that they would not be allowed to recognize the Confederacy. And they didn't. And then, of course, World War II. It's one of a succession, as the Russians sees it. World War II was one of a succession of wars in which they defended their statehood from elimination, or I mean, even practically defended the Russian nation as such from elimination. But we were, as Trump pointed out after his phone call from Putin, we were allied with Russia in that war. So we've never fought a war with Russia. We've been allied with Russia in every major war, and I think we will be allied with Russia in this new era, which was inaugurated by this morning's meetings in Saudi Arabia.
I know, it's wonderful progress here. And you can see that we'll work much better together than be kept at odds with each other. And for anyone who has their doubts about this as being intentional, I mean, just take a look at this one example. What started this war in Ukraine? Putin said, "Don't you dare put nuclear weapons on our border, and don't you let Ukraine join NATO." He not only said that, it was promised many years ago under Reagan, wasn't it?
That we wouldn't. It was under
not. Right.
Yeah, it was under George W. Bush. It was promised by Secretary of State Baker to Gorbachev.
Right. So this was all promised. It was the red line that Putin said,
Exactly.
Please do not cross it. And the Biden administration just went ahead and crossed it. Now, could that be anything but intentional? I mean, truly.
And, on the point of the oligarchy in this policy,
Uh-huh.
I mean, people may not, probably it's not well known, but you can find it out. Probably not well known in your audience, but the insistence of breaking the George W. Bush, H.W. Bush Baker promise to Russia that NATO would not expand, the insistence on expanding NATO, this was opposed by many prominent American patriots for many years. I mean, this policy was pushed through under Bill Clinton. But just to take, two significant examples that come to mind. George Kennan was the State Department Russia specialist who had famously laid out the containment doctrine of the Cold War in the late 1940s, I guess in 1947. And he was still alive and active, although retired, during the Clinton administration. And he was fiercely fighting the policy of NATO expansion. He wrote a letter to, as were many others, he wrote a letter to the New York Times saying, if we persist in expanding NATO, this will be the worst foreign policy mistake since the Cold War. It will create animosity where none existed. It will create threats where there are no threats. And he insisted it not be done, but it was done. Our Secretary of Defense, can't remember that. I forget the guy's name right now, but one of Clinton's Secretaries of Defense, who was Secretary of Defense when Clinton went ahead with the NATO expansion, wrote afterwards that he was considering resigning as Secretary of Defense to protest NATO expansion. I mean, these guys were not Russians, but they saw there was no conflict, there was no threat. Russia was not endangering other countries. There was no valid reason for NATO. It only would function as a provocation, and it was a mess. There was I forget now. I mean, you go back and find these things. There were letters by tens, if not hundreds, of American foreign policy specialists, officials, ex-officials, against that NATO expansion, and yet it was pushed through nonetheless, with no valid reason for it, and this is where it's gotten us.
This is where it's gotten us, and now we are at a point of change in all this, in the right direction. So we've had some good news just yesterday and today regarding the progress here. No NATO for Ukraine is one of the major ones, and the embassy staffing with between the U.S. and Russia, and several other things. So that all being said, from your perspective, what now do we need to work out to stop this thing? I mean, men are getting killed right now, you know? I mean, I'm just dying to get this thing stopped. What do
Yeah.
you think?
Well, we have to go all out to support President Trump in this effort. The other point, I mean, the other thing agreed and this is like a fourth point, agreed in the talks in Saudi Arabia today was that deputy foreign ministers, well, a deputy foreign minister from Russia and a deputy secretary of state from the U.S., they didn't name them, will meet to arrange a Trump-Putin summit. And it's assumed that at that summit, the Ukraine peace will be agreed on between Putin and Trump.
And when
Now,
was
when
that
is-
today?
Well, there's no date for it. It's
Okay.
It's been said, but I can't say on what authority. I believe it's been said reliably. It's been said that, well, actually, yeah, that President Trump wanted to hold that summit with President Putin in Saudi Arabia before the beginning of Ramadan, since, you can't do it during Ramadan. And Ramadan begins this year, February 28th. So that's pretty soon. Whether some Russians have said they don't think it'll be that soon. But
Soon as that? How soon would that be if they did it then?
well, today's the 18th, so February 28th is 10 days from today.
Jeez. Why can't we do it that soon?
I can't say for sure. I hope we do, really, because I think that'll put us a huge step ahead. I think they'll agree, if they meet, they'll agree on the outlines of a peace for Ukraine.
Yeah, because every day
When they meet.
every
Every
day
day there's a catacomb of unnecessary deaths. There's been unnecessary deaths, for
Right.
3 years since this war began.
It's terrible. Now, what about the other aspect of this with Zelensky saying there's not going to be anything unless they are involved in it, which they should be, but so far he's not involved. When is his involvement? Have you heard anything about when his involvement's going to be?
Well, I mean, I think I think Ukraine wants peace, but Zelensky, Ukraine wants peace. I mean, Zelensky is not legally the president. I mean, he calls himself the president and he acts like the president, but in fact, his term expired. There have been no presidential elections to reelect him, and the Constitution, according to the Constitution, he's no longer president. What Trump has said several times about Zelensky, with answer to questions like the one you just asked, what does Zelensky think? Trump has said, and also I think Kellogg has said, that, Zelensky is going to have to go to elections. And when Trump said it, he said Zelensky is going to have to go to elections, and he has 11% popularity. He's not very popular. I mean, I think, I can't say exactly how it's going to happen, but I think the settlement of the war is very likely going to involve a new government in Ukraine without Zelensky at the head of it.
Would that involve elections and everything then?
Well, I can't really say. I mean, there may be.
mean, I know you don't know. It's you don't have a crystal ball here. But if it did involve elections, this thing could drag out forever.
No, you'd have to. I agree. I mean, there has to be. Ukraine government situation is going to have to be reorganized, by Ukrainians in order to have a peace, regardless of what Zelensky thinks. Because the Ukrainians do not, I mean, the 11% popularity that Trump cited is just one of many indications that, I mean, another one is that to get soldiers to fight in this war, the Ukrainians have to kidnap them from the street. That's the only way they get anybody out there. The average age of the Ukrainian troops, last I heard, was 45 years old. There's a lot of really old men out there who can't fight. I mean, it's pathetic. The whole thing is a violation of human rights, and it's not popular with Ukrainians. And Zelensky is not going to be able to keep it going.
And I think he wants to keep it going.
Well, he
personally.
has, yeah. No, that exactly. I just read an article really that said, you know, he needs the war to remain president. And actually, I mean, I have friends in Ukraine who wrote back saying, you know, that's exactly true. He needs the war to remain president. No other way could be president.
Right, because with, you know, having to do with their law and everything,
Yeah.
He's not really the president now.
Exactly.
The excuse is there's a war on, so
Yeah.
they end that war, and that's the end of his presidency.
Yeah.
Personally, I think they ought to end the whole thing and leave him out of it and just end it and throw him out on the street or put him in jail or whatever. I have no respect for that man.
I think, President Trump, with our support, will be able to end that war. And this will be it'll be really, implicitly, it'll be a new beginning for humanity. I mean, in 2009, Lyndon LaRouche began, who I worked with for many years, and, Scott knows all about him. We haven't discussed him in the show so far. But in 2009, Lyndon LaRouche said a four-power alliance can save the world. That is, I mean, what we're going toward at whatever rate is, as I implied at one of my remarks at the very beginning of the show, what we're going toward is a world without empire, without globalism, which is empire.
Right.
A world of sovereign states like the United States, which is the way Trump sees things, right? I mean, when Trump went to the United Nations, he said, I'm America first. I hold the interests of America first, but I expect you to hold the interests of your country first. And we're going to cooperate in common interest. I mean, this is the kind of world without empire, which is potentially on the horizon. And what Lyndon LaRouche fought for from 2009 until his death 10 years later was a four-power agreement among the United States, Russia, China, and India, for a four-power agreement for the interests of mankind. I mean, for one thing, a four-power agreement for a new, workable international financial system. Since 71, when Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, the gold reserve standard, we've had an unviable floating exchange rate system, which is just massive churn of speculation, unpredictability of foreign exchange rates, which means long-term low-interest foreign investments or loans are impossible because you don't know what either currency is going to be worth as the loan is paid off. So since 71, people talk about the third world countries as being developing countries. But since the aftermath of 71, they haven't been developing at all. They've been regressing in many cases.
Right.
Because you can't invest profitably in a developing country at long-term at low interest rate because the currencies are gyrating wildly. You don't know what the currencies will be worth at the times payments are made on the loan. So it's choked off all development. But, I mean, these four nation states, which are, totally different. I mean, they couldn't be more different from each other.
Right.
Russia and the United States, which are Christian countries, India, which is, totally different tradition, China, again, totally different from the rest, and, numerous disagreements and disputes among these four nations. They couldn't be more different, but in a way, their very differences indicates that, as President Trump said with Modi, when Modi was in Washington last week, President Trump said, if the United States, Russia, China, and India get together, we can accomplish something. And that's what LaRouche was saying from 2009 to 2019. We can accomplish a new, workable international monetary system, which right there means the end of the British financial empire, which relies on the system of central banks controlling world monetary affairs instead of sovereign governments. We can get together on the need for humanity, as President Trump has said, to go back to the moon, industrialize the moon, and go on to Mars. We can get together on the basic interests of humanity, which have been trod underfoot increasingly under this globalist empire of the past 50 years. So, today's meeting in Saudi Arabia is also a step toward that four-power agreement projected by Lyndon LaRouche since 2009.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, Trump, knowingly or unknowingly, is going right along with LaRouche's advice on the four powers.
Yes, he is. You're right.
He just is. I mean, did you notice who he just had at the White House not long ago, last week? The Prime Minister of India.
Yeah,
right? Modi. And then he's been speaking with Putin and China. He's pulling it all together with these four. Am I
No,
correct
it's
in that?
absolutely true. I mean, I
Yeah.
think well,
He's
he may
doing it.
well know of LaRouche's proposal, but if not, he's responding to the same thing, that
Yeah.
these are the great nations of great population. I mean, between them, they comprise maybe not a majority, but a large part of the world's population. The high technology, and then the other thing, which in his original 2009 proposal, LaRouche cited, was the tremendous mineral wealth of Siberia, which stands ready to be exploited for the benefit of the world, and also for the benefit of Asia. I mean, what LaRouche said at the time, and really that's very it's very apropos given the things that just happened in Munich and in Germany. He said, we're moving from an Atlantic-centered world to a Pacific-centered world. The United States is a Pacific power. China is a Pacific power. Russia, in addition to being an Atlantic power, is also a Pacific power. And the greatest concentrations of world population are in the Pacific Basin. So it's a transition from an Atlantic-centered world, and you look at the way these leaders in Europe are so behind the times and so ridiculous. We're moving from an Atlantic-centered world to a Pacific-centered world, and as I say, a four-power agreement: U.S., Russia, China, and India.
You just moved right from what's it take to end this war to what do we need to do to after the war to continue and make things better, which is fantastic. That's exactly what we needed here to hear. And yeah, Trump is doing it. It is happening. And of course, there's going to be lots of opposition to this from the oligarchs,
Absolutely. And the
right?
question is, what can they do? He's really, by pushing it through so quickly, he's accomplishing things without giving them time to figure out any workable response. Just like, the purging the federal bureaucracy and shutting down these money-wasting programs that Elon Musk is doing. He's doing it so quickly that people are not even sure how to reply. And the American people, by and by large, support it.
That's right. And there's a lot of stupid things being said about it. But I think it's going along with people not really caring what these people are saying for the most part. Very silly things are being done against it. Like
Exactly.
they had the Democrats gathering together and singing. Remember that? They sang some sort of song about Doge. And they had these temper tantrums at the what was it, the education building?
Yes, the education building.
Yeah,
Let us in, let us in. The education Department of Education, which is an empty building since everybody was working from home, if at all. There was really nobody inside. And afterwards, outside, there was a crowd of Democrats. Let us in, let us in.
Yeah, and who cares about
geriatrics?
Yeah, exactly. It's like I don't think a lot of people, they make a lot of noise, but a lot of people don't really care about it that much. We really care about peace and no war. And those of us who know anything about anything, not only do we want no war, we want production and we want energy, really good energy, so we can progress and work together. And the other thing I'm thinking is, what's always going on in my mind when things start going so well is, what are the oligarchs going to do to screw things up? Which they were very successful at for many years, right? And more recently, they were very successful at it during the 2020 elections and with those riots and all that. And
The
that
George
was,
Floyd riots.
yeah, the George Floyd riots, COVID, and a hell of a lot of that was only possible because of the media.
Yep, that's true.
Regardless of the government decisions.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah, they got the whole public all worked up and scared and so on. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the mainstream media has as much power as it used to.
No, I don't think so at all. It seems to me clear. People are, the world's biggest news medium is X, formerly Twitter, with 500 million users.
Right.
And people are getting, accurate stuff off of Twitter as against lies off of the abandoned mainstream media.
Right. And they are also going to podcasts like this.
Yes.
And, many of the more well-known ones, of course, you've got Joe Rogan, and he's come a long way.
Yes.
He wasn't always the way he is right now.
Yeah, right.
And so on. And the other thing we have is the, you don't necessarily call them podcasts, but the online discussions that your organization has, the organization which I support, which is Promethean Action.
Yeah, come to our website, prometheanaction.com.
Right. Go there. And anyway, we've got you guys with your audience, which is growing all the time. Maybe not as fast as you'd like, but I think it's going to grow faster and faster. And so that's what people are leaning toward more now. Discussions like that online, podcasts, and the mainstream media has been losing money. People have been getting laid off, and I think it's all great.
Absolutely.
So I think we're really heading in the right direction now, and I don't think there's a whole hell of a lot they can do to mess it up. They can do things, and they will do things, but I think we can persevere through it. How about you?
I think so too. I mean, just, reach out to support what President Trump is doing, and push this thing forward.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't have a specific call to action here at this point, but I will say, just as an example, in getting Trump's nominees through, which is I think they're virtually all done, just about all done. We still have Kash Patel to get through,
Right.
maybe a couple other, but they've been getting through against all odds. Seemed pretty shaky, but because people have been calling their senators and emailing them, I heard the switchboards got shut down.
We had a report from the switchboard at one point, which I think was a week to 10 days ago, that the switchboard, as you said, you say it was shut down, that the switchboard was getting 1,600 calls a minute.
Right, and which is too much. Yeah, but look, the nominees have been going through, and I had the direct experience. I thought it was because they didn't want our calls. I got a few through, but one of my senators is Cory Booker, one of the not so hot guys, right?
Right.
And I got through the first time, and I didn't get through the second. But the bottom line is, we have been changing. Trump is a hero. He is a hero, and he's going to go down in history like another George Washington, I swear.
Yes, he will. You're absolutely right.
But we need to support him, and we did. Look at the example we made here with getting his nominees through. That was because of people calling
Right.
their senators and encourage them to do it. And they knew they were going to get primaried if they didn't vote the right way.
Exactly.
So, and we've got Elon Musk on our side. The primary thing reminded me of him.
Yes, right.
So, and now we need to, Trump's great, and what Trump's getting going is fantastic, but we need to back him. And I don't know the specific call to action right now. I don't know if you do, but we will be, there are going to be things we're going to need to be doing to call our senators and congressmen again, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, you bet.
So, anything else you can think of right now that we should cover with the
just more that, on this question of a four-power agreement, U.S., Russia, China, India, and President Trump, as you said, thinking in that direction. I recall that during his press conference with Prime Minister Modi, a reporter asked Trump, very good question, would you help settle the China-India border disputes? And Trump said, yes, if I'm asked to, I certainly would. People are getting killed in these border fights, and I'd be glad to help solve the problem. So all this is leading us toward a new, better future for humanity, the
exactly
maturation of the human race.
Exactly. And as you're talking, I'm thinking of the calls to action we will be having, because many of these things that he wants to do that can have to do with the four powers are going to have to go through Congress and the Senate. So we're going to need people calling and supporting it. So, of course, they can get updated on my podcast, which comes out every Friday. But Promethean Action has wonderful discussions that you'll never hear anywhere else. Every Saturday at 7 Eastern Time, and every Monday at 7 Eastern Time.
Correct. And we have updates on the site every Saturday, Monday, and Wednesday.
Right, video updates.
Video updates.
And they have text updates like every day on the site.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is written updates. There's always another article about what's going on from these guys. So PrometheanAction.com, and you guys know how to reach me at TakeControlOfYourLiberty.com. So with that, I think we covered as much as we could in one isolated conversation, don't you, Tony?
Yeah, terrific.
So thank you very much, Tony. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.
Look forward to it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. I hope you all are encouraged and enlightened by what you just heard. As discussed, Trump is really making headway negotiating with Putin toward an end to the war in Ukraine, as well as pulling four powers of the world together, the United States, Russia, China, and India, toward future peace and prosperity. And of course, there's always going to be opposition to it, but I believe you guys will do what we need to do to help get things through, just as you did in calling your senators to push Trump's nominees through. To get more information from Tony and others of his knowledge and caliber, go to PrometheanAction.com and join in their Saturday and Monday night classes. And of course, you can always watch or listen to my podcast, which comes out anew each Friday. And of course, feel free to contact me or get more info via my website at www.takecontrolofyourliberty.com. Also, please like, subscribe, and share so you and others can learn more about how to take control of your liberty.